Hey everyone. I made some PEBA free agencies. This was the last week we were able to do so, and yeah, decided to make them. I've been contemplating this for a while, but the reality is that I'm not in many leagues compared to many other people. So I find myself um, wanting to ensure to the maximum ability I can uh, the fact that I want to ensure that I have the most perfect tools possible to win this league. And I'm not in many leagues. It means a lot to me to win a league because I take each individual league I'm a part of so seriously, because it's sort of like that one main league I'm a part of. Um, which means that there was some level of hesitation in making these. There's this question of, am I screwing over my entire game? Am I, going to mess up because I traded away these picks, things like that. But with a bit of consideration today, I realized that these transactions were going to be beneficial for my overall team, threatening mons that are going to help me against specific opponents that I foresee playing in the future, aka playoffs. And yeah, I guess I just want to go right into it and the changes that I made. So the first thing I got rid of was Vaporeon. I haven't brought this since week 1, and you'd think that because it's my bulky water I'd be forced to bring it a lot, but I'm just not liking it. It I sort of thought that it would have some level of offensive pressure based on the special attack stat, but it really doesn't. Its versatility is very poor. Um, there's very rarely a time where you are able to bring an offensive move other than Scald, and the fact that Vaporeon is only getting Wish and Protect for recovery, because most of the time you're going to want to run both Wish and Protect, really leaves this one last move slot open for Toxic or Haze or Roar or Heal Bell or Ice Beam, and it really leaves no room for any level of versatility or anything along those lines. And in many matchups I've found, I strongly desire having Toxic and Haze, or Toxic and Roar, or Toxic and some coverage move. But then I often find that, my opponent's grass or water types just sort of stop Vaporeon entirely. And it really, despite a high HP stat, has not been really, from what I've seen, has not been giving me the defensive opportunities that I thought it would give me. So I'm ultimately just disappointed by the Mon. I didn't expect it to have 4 move slot syndrome when I picked it up, but it really does. And I don't think I'm ever gonna draft this again. I might, if it's lower tier or something like that, but the way I see it is just I don't really have a lot of faith in this Mon to be not only beneficial to me in beneficial for me to bring in the future. I don't see this Mon posing a credible enough threat that my opponents have to substantially prep for it, which is something that I do believe Suicune accomplishes for me. Despite the lower special attack stat, a higher base speed and overall better defensive stats makes Suicune a better Pokemon than Vaporeon to me. Although the recovery only comes in the form of rest, pressure combined with its speed allows it to be a much more successful toxic substaller. It allows it to be a I think its bulk allows it to just be a better bulky water. And in addition, I think that Calm Mind is something that my team does sort of drastically appreciate, because I've not been able to sort of bring um, bulky special attackers. Azelf is sort of a glass cannon, and Togekiss really never really has room for um, nasty plot. So I've ultimately sort of been longing for a Calm Mind mon, and that's something that Suicune gives me that Vaporeon necessarily doesn't. The other thing with Suicune is that it really forces so much prep from opponents, in that they really have to prep for this thing if they don't want to get swept. It's a really big problem, and it really does put a hole in every single um, build against my team. I mean, I reasonably think my team is already relatively scary with, Garchomp and Scizor and things like Bronzong that ultimately, demand my opponents to bring a lot of coverage. And I think the addition of Suicune onto that fear is something that will be damning for my opponents in the future. So I ultimately think Suicune is a really good pick. Not to mention, I think it does, to an extent, have a little bit more versatility than Vaporeon. I think it, you know, the two moves that it gets extra. I mean, Vaporeon gets, I believe, both Shadow Ball and Signal Beam, but it also gets Air Slash and X Sensory, which are really cool. And then, things like Extreme Speed, Tailwind is very cool tech. And as I go down, I can see sort of niche things like Curse being actually a relatively possible strategy. Things like Icy Wind, Mirror Coat, even Snarl. I know that's a move that I love using. Things along those lines. So I just think Suicune has a little bit more potential, and is just is a mon that will do the same, if not more, that Vaporeon was already doing for me. But I think I'm actually going to bring it, because it actually takes hits really well, and has a lot of offensive pressure in the sense that it can set up Calm Mind. So, and is faster, which is really nice. So a faster bulky water with more defense is always cool. So the next mon was Persian Alola. I've actually really enjoyed Alolan Persian. I thought I'd hate it, but because I valued up Vaporeon, I did have to downgrade one of my other mons. And I was considering Entei, moving Entei down to Emboar and seeing if I could squeeze a trade out of 2-Bit Crow, or I guess Elliot, who now has control of his team. But I ultimately decided that by dropping Persian, I wasn't losing anything. Persian isn't as a user currently, which means I'm not using Z Parting Shot or Persian to its greatest capacity anyway. And I think it was tiered as high as it was, because I think this, for using this thing, I do think that it was overpriced for where it was priced. So, I mean, for using it absent a Z move, it's been pretty underwhelming for being tiered where it was. So I'm just sort of a little... I'm going to miss it, but I already have a 115 mon in Azelf. So while I am missing out on sort of average speed across my team, despite upgrading to a faster bulky water, I am in a way still not too hurt by it, because it's not going to change the way my opponents adjust their speed EVs. But I really like Persian. I'm really just free agenting in it because there was nothing else I wanted a free agent. And I also was looking at the future matchups and only found one in which I felt Persian Alola would be a good bring. And I found a lot of situations where I think that I'm going to want to bring Scrafty, or at least have the threat of Scrafty in the back, that will scare a lot of my opponents. Because, things like bulky normals were things that I would say are the type of mon that my draft struggles the most with because of my lack of fighting type. But now I'm able to fix that with Scrafty. Scrafty really is a fantastic mon and underpriced for where it is. Um, Three amazing abilities: Moxie, Intimidate, and Shedskin. A really, really nice typing in a way, at least offensively. And multiple forms of setup in Bulk Up and Dragon Dance, and then Priority and Fake Out, but also just coverage generally between the dual stab, Dragon Claw, Fire Punch, even Head Smash if I want to, Ice Punch, Iron Head, Poison Jab. I'm using this thing. I've used this thing before, but only back in Gen 6, and I saw Troy use it in Owl and completely destroy people with it. So, I truly think it's a good mod. I still keep a Taunter, Super Fang, Phasing, and Roar, which is really, really nice. So, I really like Scrafty here, and I think it's underpriced for where it's at. The other thing, too, is while I do lose out on some defense with Fur Code in a Lowland Persian, I sort of do gain it back in the sense that Scrafty does get Intimidate and has really, really nice defensive investments. So if I ever do want to make a defensive spread, Scrafty is something that is extremely viable. And though it doesn't get recovery, Persian didn't get recovery anyway either, but though it doesn't get recovery, it does get Shed Skin, which can wake it up from some rests, which is really, really nice. So those are sort of the transactions I decided to make. I really need a fighting type, and I wanted to have one going into playoffs to feel more comfortable in my matchups, and I wanted to have a water type that I knew I can rely on and wasn't one that I disliked. Now, the one downside to this, in my opinion, is that, and I guess I'll just be candid about it, is that I did sort of think that, actually I'm not going to reveal anything. I feel like that'd be stupid. So I'm not going to talk about specific matchups or anything like that, but what I will talk about are sort of the what the playoffs are looking like. So these are the rankings as of week 8. As you can see, we are the top of the entire league, actually, being the only team left undefeated. That being said, I'm not really concerned about going undefeated like I was in the ABC. As long as I can lock top seed, or at least, be in the upper range of seeds, I'm okay. The people we have to play left are Eevee, Jack, and 2-Bit, but I believe it'll be Elliot. I'm pretty sure I'm just going to mess around and have fun for those last few games because I'm essentially already locked first, second, or third seed. There's no world in which I get fourth seed. So the way I see it is that I'm probably playing Slick, but if things get weird, like I start losing, I might be playing Jakal, either of which I'm okay with, but I did think that my free agents would aid me in those matchups, especially because I just don't think that a Lowland Persian or a Vaporeon really have matchup in the majority of playoff games I envision myself in. So the other thing, too, to note is, I will inevitably have to face, assuming that Slick is the fourth seed here, and it could justifiably be Tony. I don't think it'll be Elliot because he's just sort of like joining as a replacement. Alternatively, it could be Jack if he starts winning out. And I know that he's the player to do so. He did take over an 0-4 team, so he technically is 3-1 right now. But ultimately, the way I see it is, I'm assuming for now it's going to be Slick. But if not, I did look at these matchups, and while I would like some of the mons I just free agent away for them, I don't think losing them hurt me in these matchups. So ultimately, I'm okay with my free agents. But playoff picture, I'm presuming, is versus Slick, and then between Blake and Jackal, I really have no idea. I think could go either way, 50-50. They haven't even played in the main season yet, so it's going to be interesting to see how that match turns out. But I'm also sort of thinking towards finals as well because, it's important to win if I'm doing this much pre-planning. But I'm ultimately going off the major assumption that I'm playing Troy. Um, Not to say that my free agents were really looking at that matchup. I actually am sort of, if anything, um, the free agent losses hurt me more in this conference than they do in this conference. I think they're very beneficial for getting to finals, but I do think that the matchups might get a little bit harder um, against some of the people in the Sword Conference, and that's a risk that I was willing to take in order to at least get to finals, because it's a matter of, 2 games getting to finals versus a finals game against, an opponent that may or may not even show up in the first place in finals. If that makes sense, that probably made zero sense whatsoever. But yeah, the way I see it is, and I'm just sort of making predictions here, is the semifinals. Ideally I win my quarters game, but it's incredibly likely I don't. Slick is an amazing player. And I know that he was looking at making some changes, and I'm a little bit worried about that, but we'll figure it out. But outside of me versus Slick, and I don't even know if I'm playing Slick at this point yet, but outside of me versus Slick, I do sort of see the semis in here coming down to Galadite versus Troy, or even Galadite versus Zombie. I think Zombie is an amazing player and just sort of like slid, and I think that he might be able to pull off the upset here, but ultimately, I do see myself playing. If I get to finals, I see Galadite and Troy as the two most likely opponents. We've already faced Galadite, so that's going to lead to some mind games. I think I'd rather play Troy just because of because I really don't like rematches. So I'm not really sure about it yet, but those are sort of my playoff predictions. If I had to predict someone else that wasn't me to come out of the conference, I think finals could also go to Blake Trout. He's been on a 6-game streak or a 5-game streak so far, and I don't see it ending anytime soon. So I think Blake is another player who very well could actually win the league. So it's very interesting. Those are sort of my broad predictions. I really have no idea, and I'm speaking sort of with the current top 4 in mind, assuming that they are going to maintain where they are, but really all it takes is one or two upsets for Bidoof to pop up to 4th seed, or for Tony to pop up to 4th seed, or Jack to pop up 4th seed. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I have not played my week 9 game yet, but that is something to keep on the lookout for. So those are my transactions and predictions, and yeah.